Hey everybody, it's Gordon Majak here, back with another episode of Timeless Pop, Rock, and Soul. And today, like yesterday, we're going to do one of those things where we talk about one of my favorite artists, one of my favorite bands from back there in the 70s, a band you probably know yourself quite well, but a song that you probably don't know. Just like that Chicago kind of came out of nowhere yesterday with Rediscovery. There was a great song buried on one of those classic Chicago albums. And today we have another one, a great song buried on a classic album from the 70s. Let me show you what we are talking about. Here's the album in question from 1976, and this is one of my favorite albums. This is the Doobie Brothers' Taking It to the Streets album, a classic from 1976. Let me tell you about the Doobie Brothers. I was first exposed to the Doobie Brothers there in the spring and summer of 1972 when they released their big breakthrough hit album, Toulouse Street. And that was the Doobie Brother album that had Listen to the Music and Rockin' Down the Highway and their great cover of Jesus Is Just All Right, and on and on and on. And young Gordy Majak at age 14, I had every note of that album memorized. I knew that album inside and out. Loved that record and still do. Toulouse Street. That was the Doobies' big breakthrough. And I remember that summer and that album quite well because the other album that was sort of my big record from that summer that I bought two albums that summer, the Doobie Brothers' Toulouse Street and Chicago's fifth album with Saturday in the Park on it. What a summer that was for some great music and some great albums. That's when I became aware of the Doobies. Summer of 1972, listened to the music, Jesus Is Just All Right, loved them right out of the gate. The next year, 1973, they came back with another killer album. That would have been The Captain and Me. A couple more huge hits on that one. A couple more Doobie classics. Long Train Runnin', China Grove, South City Midnight Lady was a great cut. Dark-Eyed Cajun Woman, Without You. Again, it goes on and on. The Doobie Brothers were on a serious roll. The next year, they came out, this is 1974 now, with maybe my favorite Doobie Brother album of all, and that is the classic What Were Once Vices Are Now Habits. Another record just chock full of great songs, too many to list. Of course, Blackwater was on that album. The great Tom Johnston tune, Another Park, Another Sunday. What a record that was, one of my all-time faves. And again, another album just chock full of great material. They followed that up with their fourth incredible album in a row in 1975 with the Stampede album. And the big hit off the Stampede album for the Doobie Brothers there was their great remake of the Motown tune, Take Me in Your Arms and Rock Me. And at that point there in 1975, it looked like the Doobie Brothers could do no wrong, and certainly not in my book. Toulouse Street, The Captain and Me, What Were Once Vices, Stampede. There's 4 albums in 4 years, and talk about a rock'em sock'em catalog that the Doobie Brothers were building at that point. It looked like that locomotive was just going to keep right on thundering down the tracks and nothing could stop it. And I actually had the good fortune of seeing the Doobie Brothers in concert there in the spring of 1975 when they toured behind that Stampede album. And as if I didn't love them enough, what a show. Oh my goodness. People forget. It's easy to forget what a dynamic and powerhouse live band the Doobie Brothers were back there in the day. And when I saw them there in support of that Stampede album in the spring of 75, they blew me out of my chair in that concert. You got to imagine they had Tom Johnston, Patrick Simmons up front on guitars and vocals, Jeff Skunk Baxter as a third guitarist, the great Tiran Porter on bass, 2 drums, They had the Memphis Horns with them on that particular tour. The great Bill Payne on keyboards. It was like a 10 or 11 piece band up there. And those guys absolutely smoked, no pun intended, the Doobie Brothers. They were on fire. Again, no pun intended. 1975. Looked like nothing could go wrong for those guys. Well, unfortunately, sadly, right after I saw them was when the wheels really started to come off in a big way for the Doobie Brothers. And that was directly the result of the declining health of the great Tom Johnston, their primary songwriter, their primary lead vocalist. Patrick Simmons, of course, and Tom Johnston always shared the guitar responsibilities. They both wrote songs, they both sang songs, but Tom Johnston was really the primary writer in the band, and it was his sound, that China Grove, long train running, listen to the music, rocking down the highway sound. That's really that Tom Johnston sound that we're talking about. As I said there in 1975, Tom Johnston started having some terrible health challenges, which had gone all the way back to his youth with bleeding ulcers and things of that nature. And of course, the constant grind that the band was in at that time there in 1975 of make an album, go on the road basically for the rest of the year, come back, make an album, turn around, go back on the road. Like so many other bands, like all the big bands of the 70s there, that was the wash, rinse, and repeat over and over and over. And that's what, of course, burned out and killed so many groups, if not outright killed their band members in one way or another, certainly killed the creativity of so many bands back then, because the rigors and the demands of their careers were just non-stop. It just never ended. Album tour, and a lot of those guys just couldn't take it. No wonder why they couldn't take it. And one of those guys who had a hard time taking it was Tom Johnston of the Doobie Brothers. So just when it looked like this band could not get any hotter there in 1975, it started to come apart. And it got to a point where Tom Johnston could no longer basically work. He couldn't tour. So with Tom Johnston basically going from being the primary songwriter and the primary vocalist in the band and really the driving musical force in the band, along with Patrick Simmons, you take him out of the picture, and all of a sudden you have a void a mile wide. And for the Doobie Brothers, what a challenging time there to try to figure out how to maintain that career that they had built so beautifully up to that point. Well, with Tom Johnston basically out of the picture, it came time to do their next album, which was this album, as we said. When it came time to do this record in 1976, Tom Johnston was basically out of the picture. He couldn't go anymore. And so Patrick Simmons and Tiran Porter and Jeff Baxter and John Hartman and Keith Knudsen, the other Doobies, put their heads together to try to figure out what the heck they could do to salvage this thing. And Jeff Baxter, who had famously played with Steely Dan back in the old days before he joined the Doobie Brothers, said, hey, I know a guy that I used to play with in Steely Dan that plays keyboards, and he's a pretty good singer. It'll change our sound. We'll go from not as much of a guitar-driven sound to more of a soulful and R&B kind of a keyboard sound, but he's a pretty talented dude. We should give him a shot. And that gentleman, of course, was the one and only Michael McDonald. And as the story goes, when the Doobie Brothers got into the recording studio there in 1976 to do that, Taking It to the Streets album, as the story famously goes, they all sort of looked at each other as Michael McDonald came in and said, well, I've got a few songs here, I can contribute a few songs to the album. And as he started to run through some of his demos, notably the title track of the album, Taking It to the Streets, basically the other guys in the band and the producers were looking at each other like, holy shit, where did this guy come from? Listen to these songs. And Jeff Baxter, of course, was encouraging the other Doobies to move in this new musical direction and try to fill the Tom Johnston void, not by trying to replicate the Tom Johnston void, but by basically ignoring it and going in a different direction altogether. And the Doobies being the great musicians that they are, and those guys are all great musicians. They could play so many different styles and play so many things so well. Not to mention, like I said, what a dynamic live group they were. Those guys could throw down. And so Jeff Baxter was encouraging the other guys in the band, okay, well, this opens up some opportunities for everybody to start writing some different kind of material. We're not locked into that Tom Johnston chunka rock and roll sound like the group had forged there for those previous 4 albums that I mentioned that were such great albums. And they started to stretch out a little bit in the studio. And Michael McDonald got his thing going there with Taking It to the Streets. Patrick Simmons started writing some different sounding and a little bit more adventurous material. And in the case of this record today, the band's fantastic bass player, the great Tiran Porter, turned in a song of his own that became, in my mind, an instant Doobie Brothers classic, despite the fact that, as I just showed you a second ago here, despite the fact that it was the B-side of the single that kicked off the album. There's Michael McDonald's Taking It to the Streets, the title track, which was the first single off the album. And Tiran Porter's song For Someone Special was relegated to the B-side of the single. Another great, masterful song, just like with the Chicago Yesterday, buried on this album. But thank God it got made in the first place. Thank God this song got recorded. Thank God Jeff Baxter encouraged the other Doobies in the Michael McDonald era to stretch out and try some different things, because it resulted in this incredible song that I'm going to play for you here in just a second. Always loved Tiran Porter, just a monster of a bass player. One of my very favorite bass players from back in the day there. And who would have ever have known that Tiran Porter would have this song inside of him and these vocal chops? That's what I took away right out of the gate with this song when I heard this album. And I remember hearing this record the first time and just going, the Doobie Brothers? Is this even right? Did they put the wrong name on the label? How is this even possible that this group could shift gears so fundamentally and so beautifully and so effortlessly? The Doobie Brothers musical universe was pretty broad and pretty cool, but it was sort of over here. And to come into a different universe with Michael McDonald's influence in the band, with Jeff Baxter's influence in the band, and then, like I said, the experimentation and the really open-minded approach that Patrick Simmons and Tiran Porter took on this album, you wind up with something that's really pretty incredible in its own right. And now, this song in particular, there's some messages going on in this song. This song is most definitely a message from Tiran Porter, the song's composer and the song's lead vocalist, to his dearly departed former band member, bandmate, the great Tom Johnston. Now, I did not know that when I very first heard this record. I just saw, For Someone Special. Who is he talking to? He's very definitely singing this to someone. He's got someone in particular in mind. And as I heard it a few times and really started looking at it, and as I realized what was going on with the Tom Johnston situation in the band, and because of his ongoing health issues and his inability to basically record or tour much anymore. He did have one song on this album, but I think it was a song that was already in the can. I don't think it was a new song that he was writing to try to fit in with this new incarnation of the band, because when the Michael McDonald thing happened, Tom Johnston basically just said, okay, I'm out. I can't do this anymore. I can't do this grind. And plus the musical direction that you guys are going now with this new material looks like it's going away from my strengths. And so Tom Johnston just basically bowed out. And as I got into the story and started to find out, oh, I see what's going on there with Tom Johnston is no longer in the group. They're going in a completely different direction here. All of a sudden, this song took on so much beautiful added meaning, because then it became crystal clear that this song was written for Tom Johnston. And when they let Tiran Porter sing this song in concert, now the whole picture came together. And I don't remember if Tiran Porter introduced it being for Tom Johnston. I don't remember that sort of an introduction for the song in concert. But when they performed it live, it was clear that the band believed in this material, and they were going to carve out space in the concert for what on the surface would appear to be a song that, should be buried on the album. But just as with Chicago, this is how deep and how talented and how creative these groups, so many of these great groups, were back there in the 1970s. They could stretch out and they could do a lot of different things, and you just had to give them a chance. So, from 1976 and the Takin' It to the Streets album, this is Tiran Porter on bass and lead vocals, and a song that he wrote for his old buddy Tom Johnston, for everything that Tom Johnston was going through when this album was made. It's a song called For Someone Special. Just got to pause it for a second. As I hear this now, it takes me right back to that concert when I saw them there in 1976 on this Takin' It to the Streets tour. And I was right directly in front of Tiran Porter there, front stage, center stage, when he did this song. And I can visualize it in a second. It was so cool the way they had him lit. They kept the stage very dark. And it was almost like a jazz club environment with just blue lights and green lights and just very soft. Now listen to what they do here. Does this sound anything like a Doobie Brother album? Not one that I've heard of. This album was such a departure, and you can really hear the Steely Dan influence coming in here with Jeff Baxter on that guitar. And of course, Michael McDonald and those really jazzy keyboard parts and those really cool Fender Rhodes parts. Sounds almost more like a Steely Dan record than an old Doobie Brother record, but a wonderful departure for sure. Check this out. Such a beautiful and understated and sophisticated pop tune. Tiran Porter writing a beautiful, heartfelt tribute to his buddy Tom Johnston, For Someone Special. For the band to be this deep and just finding so much great material in the midst of a so-called struggle to find material really just goes to show you how talented they really were. And guys that never really got the credit, as much credit perhaps as they should have, such as Patrick Simmons, who had been there from the start with Tom Johnston. And in this case, Tiran Porter, the bass player and the singer on this song. Really cool to see some of those guys get their moment to shine and to really stretch out and do some different kinds of material. Couldn't wait to get to that one. For Someone Special, Tiran Porter singing his heart out for Tom Johnston. You got to love that. It's a beautiful thing. We will be coming back with another one here. We're going to do another, next video will be a similar thing. Another one of my old favorite bands from the 70s, but a song that somehow may have gotten lost in the larger picture of all the hits and the famous albums and all that stuff. But you just got to dig a little because there's so many great songs buried on so many of those older albums. And we are going to discover another one in the next video. Thank you for watching, subscribing, commenting, liking, and all that stuff. I appreciate it. Can't wait to get to the next one. We'll be coming back with that one ASAP. And see you then.